Well, guys, welcome to the Vintage Truth Podcast. I'm back from a week of incredible ministry out in California. We began with doing a podcast with Jack Hibbs in his studio, and then going to the congregation, 2,500 plus, on a Wednesday night to do Happening Now.
What should Christians and how should Christians be living at a time like this where we've been given a reprieve as a nation? How should we be living? What should we be doing, guys?
I always think in sports analogies. I remember the time when Alabama won the national championship. They celebrated in the locker room. The next morning, Nick Saban was on a private jet back to Tuscaloosa planning for the next season. You know, when you make an interception in football, you go, we made the interception, but guess what? Now the offense has to take the field. And it's time for Christians to stop being on the defensive. Amen. It's time for us to stand up, to be light, to be salt, to be what Peter was on the day of Pentecost, to stand up and be bold.
That then parlayed into the next day, where Todd and I recorded two different shows on at hischannel.com. By the way, following the Happening Now broadcast on Wednesday night, my book, The End of the World According to Jesus of Nazareth, shot to the number 74 spot out of 32 million available books on Amazon. 74. And people couldn't get it fast enough. And if you have not gotten a copy of this book, The End of the World According to Jesus of Nazareth, I highly encourage you. It will help you understand the end times through the words and eyes and mind and heart and plan of Jesus Christ. So go to Amazon right now, snatch that book up. And then on Friday and Saturday, Jack and myself and Todd hosted along with an incredible staff at Chino Hills and their youth ministry, a youth prophecy conference, the first of its kind to my knowledge. And we had over 950 teenagers come into that auditorium, and we taught them an overview of Bible prophecy. We covered all the events. It was incredible. And each session was followed by a Q&A, which many of the sessions had 50 kids deep on either side waiting to ask their questions. It was just an amazing time of ministry. And there was live streamed to over 1,000 people. The video from Wednesday night has already had over 300,000 views as of this taping here. So great things happened. Then went straight from there, Saturday night, Sunday morning. I preached back-to-back messages at Kindred Community Church, our dear friend Philip DeCourcy there. And then after that, we went to Tom Hughes' The End of the World Conference, where Todd and I both gave a message to that, and then we were done. And as you might imagine, we were spent. And I got back at midnight the following night, got up the next morning, started all over again, short week, headed to Iowa, Albert City, Iowa, for a Prophecy Pros pop-up conference this weekend. And then the next week I'll go to Chicago to tape The King is Coming television show, episodes for that. And then the following week I go to Pre-Trib in Dallas, Pre-Trib Conference. Check that out. It's a gathering of scholars and teachers that happens every year. I'll be presenting something on my book, The End of the World According to Jesus of Nazareth. Okay, so, and then I'm done for the year, Lord willing. But in the midst of all that, I've got my doctoral studies that I'm doing, which is an enormous, time-consuming deal that I'm doing every week. So I'm a guy that needs your prayers. In fact, I've been really thinking through and praying over this idea of prayer support for ministry. And God is impressing upon my heart that I need you to pray for me. I need you to pray specifically about ways in which God can use me more effectively. And that involves everything from just my health to my stamina to my schedule to my mind, the mindset of my mind, my personal connection to Jesus every day. All of those things are involved in that. And if you want to know how to pray for me, one way to begin would be simply to go to jeffkinley.com and sign up for my weekly newsletter. That newsletter will essentially tell you what happened the previous week, what's coming, and it'll give you a great way on how to pray for me. Then I'm strongly considering sending out some special short videos that just tell my prayer team how to pray for me. So anyway, there's some things I've been thinking about, but all that to say, of course, the Lord's called me to a very robust pace that I'm having to run right now. And so I would just pray you continue to lift me up. And the other thing too is that we've got some cool things planned for the new year. 2025, my schedule is booking up fastly. And I've already had to turn down several opportunities just because the dates are already gone. So if you are a pastor or if you know someone who's thinking about doing a conference or a pop-up conference or the Prophecy Pros, whatever it might be, the a good word will be go ahead and get in your request now and get it booked, or at least get it nailed down. So that's kind of what's going on. That gives you an overview of what's been happening, how to pray, and God is just continuing to expand and explode this ministry. Here I am in my new studio, and we're recording not just this, but the Prophecy Pros across the hall. Down the hall is Jeff Kinley Live, and then also down the hall is going to be some incredible videos that Todd Hampson and I are. I can't tell you too much about it right now. I'll just tell you this: some good things are coming for you, and so I want to make you aware of that. So continue to pray for everything going on in the ministry. Now let's hop right into Ephesians chapter 5, because I don't want to spend any more time talking about me. Ephesians 5, we had gotten to the point where we had talked about the role of the woman, the role of the wife in a marriage. Then we pivoted there, talks about the role of the husbands and what God requires of husbands, which is a pretty stout regimen, stout request and command. But when we get to chapter 6, now Paul says, okay, we've talked about moms, we've talked about dads and husbands and stuff. Let's talk about children. Children, what is your responsibility to your parents? Look what it says in chapter 6 and verse 1. It says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. So Paul is addressing the family here. He's teaching us how to have a biblically functioning family. That's essentially what he's doing here. And he knows that there are things in the world that attack the family, not only just interpersonal relationships, but in a family you've got divorce, you've got stepdads and stepmoms that come in and trying to make a new family where there once was an old family. There's transition for kids, obviously difficult transition there. But there's things like not just divorce, but rebellion. There's physical and emotional abuse sometimes in families. There's spiritual voids. In other words, there are, people in a family who are not on board spiritually, whether it's the mom or the dad or the children. And there are wayward children that we talk about, right? So, but Paul is setting the standard here. He's setting the bar for us here. And he basically addresses two groups in the first 4 verses. The first one is, of course, children, and then he says he talks to fathers here in verse 4. But let's talk about children here. He says, what if your child? It says to obey your parents, but what if your child is not a Christian? What happens then? What do you do with a child that's not a Christian there? We have in Ephesians this verse in Ephesians 6 or Ephesians 6:1. But in Colossians, he repeats this. He says, children, be obedient to your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. Now, this is obviously not a verse to justify any type of abuse. It's not a verse that says, oh, just whatever your parents say, no matter what it is, immoral, against the law, whatever, just do what they say. No, that's not what this verse is saying. Because there's a presupposition here. Paul is speaking here to believers. And he's speaking to believers that presumably are willing to follow the Lord in some type. And so that's why he says, children, follow your parents and obey your parents. He says, that uses this phrase here, in the Lord, meaning that because you're a Christian, you should obey your parents because God wants you to obey your parents. It doesn't say that they're always nice or if they're always acting like Christians, but it simply says to do it. Being in student ministry for 25 years, I had a lot of students who were following Jesus, but their parents were not. And they would ask me questions. What do I do? My dad asked me to do this. My mom asked me to do this. I said, well, as long as it's not immoral or against the law, then, or against what God's word says, then you obey your parents because they're God's authority over you. It doesn't say as long as they're filled with the Spirit, obey them. It just says obey them in the Lord, meaning you obey them as you would obey God, which is similarly to what he had just told the wives, obey your husbands. Uh, it says, be subject to your own husbands, verse 22, as to the Lord. He then told husbands, obey, to love their own wives as the Lord loves the church. So, the Lord is our model. Christ was submissive to the Father, and God wants us to be submissive to our parents. And they say, well, why is it such a big deal? Well, it says, for this is right, he says here, and it says in the Colossians passage that because it's well pleasing to the Lord. So what does that mean? Well, it just simply means that it's along God's created order. God has an order of creation and an order of authority. There's an authoritarian chain of command here. And he says, do this because it's right. Jesus submitted to the Father during his earthly ministry as the God-man. That was the authoritarian method there. The church submits to Christ. Wives submit to husbands. And children submit to parents. God put it this way to maintain order and harmony in the family. And he follows this up here with verse 2. He says, honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment with a promise that it may go well with you, that it may be well with you, and that you may live long in the Lord. He's quoting there from Deuteronomy from Exodus chapter 20 and verse 12. Now, why is obeying your parents, honoring your parents, how does that help you live longer? Well, the word honor here means to show respect for, means to care for them, bring honor to them. And as a result of honoring your parents, here's the general principle. The general principle is a person who is disobedient to his parents is disobedient to someone who wants to look out for them and take care of them. A person who obeys his parents is a person that will likely live longer because the parents are the ones who are looking out for your well-being. So, for example, the parents are trying to protect you from anything that would threaten your life or shorten your life. That's what normal parents do. Obviously, a parent that doesn't care about their children, doesn't do that. But most parents do. Most parents care for their children. That means that if they talk to you about immorality or about drugs or drinking, reckless living, not walking into the street without looking both ways, obeying your parents will make you live longer as a general rule. And as a general rule, it'll also lead to a more fulfilling life because, again, most parents naturally care for their kids, they look out for their kids, and they want the best for their kids. So that's another reason why you should obey and honor your parents. And God has promised that blessing of long life on the whole, as a general principle, if you do that. And he said, well, when do you stop obeying your parents? Well, I would say that once you go outside of the home and you are now living on your own, you'll obey your parents. And he said, well, does that apply to college students? I said, to me, that you're still under your parents' authority because you're not officially out on your own, unless you've made some sort of arrangements with your parents. Your parents say, look, you're on your own now, kid. I'm not doing anything. I'm not paying for anything. You're completely a self-contained person. Aside from that, I would say you're still under the authority of your parents. In fact, that was the view that I took when I was in college. Now, just to give you a little background, my parents were not Christians. And they weren't bad parents. They were great parents, but they weren't Christians. So they weren't leading me biblically in my life, but they were leading me. They did have wisdom that I did not have. And so I remember when I was dating this girl who lived in another state, and I was at the University of South Carolina. She was at the University of Arkansas, and we were dating. And I kind of mentioned to my dad, kind of in a passing comment, hey, I might like to transfer to Arkansas. Well, my dad immediately knew that meant paying out-of-state tuition. And at that time, my dad was contributing towards my college education. And so I, I said that to him, and he said, "No, that's not happening." It's like, okay. And I remember vividly praying to praying to my heavenly Father about my earthly father, and just saying, God, if he doesn't want me to transfer, guess what? I'm not transferring, because my Bible tells me to obey my parents, and I'm still under his authority. When I would, if I would have gotten out of the home and been on my own, supported myself, I think that that'd be a different case. But I was still there. And so I just began to pray that maybe God would change my dad's heart, and without bugging him about it. And so I'll never forget, the very next summer, my girlfriend and I, along with about 50 other college students, went to Hawaii, where we just did street ministry essentially for the whole summer. And during that time, I remember calling my dad. It was called long distance back then on a phone, very expensive to do. And I remember calling my dad, and we had a conversation. And toward the end of the conversation, out of the blue, he just said, "Oh, by the way, if you want to transfer to be with Beverly, then that's fine with us. We'll find a way to make it work." And God just changed his heart. Well, that's just one example of how, even as a semi-adult, I mean, I was 21 years old or whatever, 20 years old, how God changed someone's heart, changed your parents' heart. So, but while you're in the home, you are to obey your parents. Now, look what he says in verse 4. He says, "Now, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but on the other hand, bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." The discipline and instruction of the Lord. Now, look what he says there. Don't provoke your children to anger. What does that mean? That means don't treat your children in such a manner that causes them to be frustrated, that causes them to be sad, that causes them to feel hurt or abused, that causes them to want to rebel. And again, having been in student ministry when I was there for 25 years, I had the luxury of observing a lot of parents. And I saw a lot of parents that provoked their children to anger. So how do they do that? Well, there's basically two ways to make your child go astray from God. One is to have no influence in his life concerning the Lord. In other words, you don't have anything going on in your life, and you just giving your kids up to his own self or herself, or to the world or the school or to the church or whatever, and you're not pouring into their life. That's a great way to provoke them away from God. On the other end of the spectrum, swinging the pendulum the whole other way, is the Christian parent that's hyper involved in every aspect of their child's life. In other words, there's no room for the child to grow him or herself, or to have an individual relationship with the Lord. It all comes through the parent. And this leads to the dangerous heresy of legalism, which is basically making man's laws appear like they're God's laws. Now, there are certain standards in a home you may have that are not necessarily biblical standards, but they're just things for your family that don't have to be legalism. Hey, in our family, we choose not to watch certain kinds of movies. We choose not to, expose our kids to certain places or whatever. That's not necessarily legalism, okay? It's just, sometimes it's just an outgrowth of your love and protection for your child. So we're not saying that. But you can bear down so hard on your children that it really makes them have a bad taste in their mouth about Christianity, about the Lord. Now, again, some of that you're just going to have to risk if you're a parent. I mean, if you go to church on Sunday mornings, your kids are going to go to church with you. They should go with you. And you say, well, they don't want to go, but I make them go. Well, guess what? At this stage of the game, that's just something you risk. I would make them go. But there are other things that you can do. You can be really harsh to them and try to make something spiritual about it. We don't go to the lake. We don't go to the beach because that's where heathens hang out or whatever. And your kid's going to grow up thinking, well, gosh, I guess all the fun people do the non-Christian things, and all the people who are miserable, like me, have to do the Christian thing and not get to have fun in life. So you can take it to an extreme. So the key is this. If you're a parent, listen to what I'm about to say. The key is knowing each individual child well. In other words, you are or should be an absolute expert on your child. You should know their personality type, their bent. You should know what causes them to give up, what excites them. You should know what avenues communicate truth best to them, what way methods of teaching or showing or demonstrating or ministry, whatever. You should know how they learn, their learning style. You should know that about your kids. Know them really, really well, because here's why that's so important. If you're a Christian, you desire to communicate the truth to your kids, then knowing your kid, knowing your child, your daughter or son is the most effective thing you need to do. And then from that, you can then take the truth that you know and communicate that to them in a way that is most effective to them. I'll give you just an example from my life. I wrote a book called A Dad-Sized Challenge, Building a Life-Changing Relationship with your son. And it's all about a book that teaches dads how to leverage their relationship with their sons in order to help them know God and pass on the faith to them. And so it's, I talk about how the greatest tool that you have as a parent, number one, is your relationship with God. As strong as that is, that's going to be your greatest tool. And then off of that, your second most greatest tool is how to develop the relationship with your son or your daughter that most effectively communicates Christianity. And guess what? If you've got 3 kids, then you're going to take a little bit different route with each one of them. Now, the truth is the same because it's God's truth. But like with our 3 sons, we have 3 completely different personalities, and so, and some are more outgoing than others. Some are more analytical than others. Some are more playful than others. Some are more, they have more of an engineering mind. Others have more of a logical. I mean, there's so many things that enter into that. And that's why you have to spend time with your child and study your child. Uh, I often would tell parents there is no such thing as quality time. No such thing. It doesn't exist unless you also have quantity time. Quality time is a phrase invented by parents who feel guilty that they're not spending enough time with their kids. Oh, we just had some quality time. No, you didn't. Unless you have quantity time to back that up, there is no quality time. And so you have to know your kid. You have to be committed to your children. And this is, when we had kids, we were without children for 7 years after we got married. And it was by choice because we were deep into youth ministry together, and we were going so fast that we felt like God wanted us to really develop a great foundation of ministry together. And we did. And my wife was an integral part of my ministry. But we decided that when God would give us children, that we would greatly scale back, obviously on her involvement, but even my involvement as well. And so I told the Lord that when my kids came along, this is as a pastor, that God, now family is first in terms of my kids and ministry second. And so as a youth pastor, I would tell my students, I would say, look, I love you guys so much. We have so much fun together, don't we? Learning about Jesus and have fun together. But guess what? I don't love you like I love my own children. So I'm going to be unavailable sometimes because you're going to, in about 4 years, you're going to be out of here, or I may be out of here in terms of not being at this church. But guess what? I'll still have my kids and you'll be gone. So they're my number 1 disciples and you're my number 2 disciples. And so we had a clear understanding of that. And just to give you just a quick illustration of how that played out in my life, I was at a very large church, thousands of people at this church. And I was the college and youth pastor, and I had an associate youth pastor that was working with me. I had interns, secretary, big budget, big ministry, hundreds and hundreds of kids. And the administration of that church wanted me to go out during the week and visit people who had visited the church. And so I appealed and I said, well, I'm already visiting, all the youth that come. I'm already out on Wednesday nights for youth group. I'm already out on Sunday nights for church. I'm out a lot of Friday nights for football games and stuff. We do retreats for weekends. We do week-long camps in the summer. And, my family gets to come to some of those obviously with me, but not all of them. And I said, I think I'm out a lot. I think I'm out as much as I need to be. I was told that a condition for employment at this church was going to be that I had to be out in the week reaching businessmen so that businessmen could come to the church and joined the church and helped support the ministry financially. So it was really kind of a money scheme, is really what it boiled down to. And I just said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. And so I was told, well, you're probably going to get fired then. And this was my response. I don't know that I've ever shared this, but if I have, forgive me. But here's what I said. This is to the executive pastor of the church. I said, here's what I'll do. I'm going to go back up to my office, to the youth office. I'm going to print out a list of 25 names and phone numbers of youth pastors all across the country that I know personally that would love to come and be the youth pastor at this big old church and make a nice salary and have all this budget money and do all this stuff. I said, but here's the deal. I have 3 disciples at my home. I named them, my 3 boys. And I said, I'm the only daddy they'll ever have. And this is the only childhood they'll ever have. And they know I'm a pastor. And one day when they turn to 18 and leave home for college, they are not going to look me in the eye and say, where were you when we were growing up? And I said, so you can go get yourself another youth pastor. And I walked out and called the man's bluff. And they didn't fire me. You know what I walked out with? I walked out with my sense of integrity, biblical integrity and obedience, because I wanted to serve my children the way God wanted me to. Now, I wasn't a perfect dad growing up, okay? But let me tell you what I do have today. I have 3 grown sons, ages 35, 33, and 31. And we, the 3 and the 4 of us, could not be any closer as men than we are right now. We're best friends with each other. We love each other to death. We love to spend time with each other. And then their families as well, their wives and their kids, my grandchildren. And the only reason that I am reaping, and I'm talking like lottery benefits from my relationship with my kids and now my grandkids and stuff, is because my wife and I chose this to be the priority for us. That instead of being the pastor who's harsh on his kids about Christianity, we would make Jesus a part of our everyday life, our everyday family life. And God will be a part of everything that we did. And it would just be something that was natural for us. And today I get to call my 3 sons, my 3 of my best friends. And we love each other dearly. And there's never a greeting or an exit where there's not a hug. And so I share that to you, not to toot my own horn, but just to give you a story of, yeah, you're going to sacrifice now. And you might not get that raise you're looking for. You might not get the promotion you're looking for, but you will get the promotion. God will promote you. God will honor your commitment to your kids. It's not a foolproof guarantee. Kids can do what they want to when they get all out of the home. But you know what? God wants us to prioritize our families. And that's exactly what he's saying here. Wives, prioritize your husbands. Husbands, prioritize your wives. Children, obey your parents. And fathers, make sure you bring your kids up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord. And that goes far beyond what we say. It's how we live. It's the ambiance, the aroma, the atmosphere of our home. And when you do that, I believe that God greatly blesses you. And so humble people, we're just living for Jesus. We're just ordinary people, right? But we serve God faithfully in every way that we can. Well, next week, we're going to jump into the next verse, which talks about slaves. And we're going to talk about what does the Bible say about slavery and why does he address slaves here? We'll find out the answer to that next week on the Vintage Truth Podcast. Hop on over to jeffkinley.com. Follow what's going on. Some goodies for you waiting over there. And sign up for that newsletter as well. God bless you guys. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next week.